It was past midnight when billionaire Ethan Cross returned home after another empty charity gala. But as he stepped into his master bedroom, his heart froze. On his bed lay a little girl clutching two tiny newborns wrapped in torn blankets. She looked up, eyes filled with fear, and whispered, "Please don't take us away. We'll be quiet." That one trembling sentence changed Ethan's entire life. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, watching the little girl try to hush the two crying newborns. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mansion, built on steel and success, had always been silent and cold, yet tonight it echoed with soft cries of life. Lila's hands trembled as she fed the babies with a bottle she'd found near the kitchen. Her tiny face was pale, her dress torn, but her eyes carried a strange strength. Ethan had met thousands of people, powerful men and glamorous women, but never anyone who looked at him the way she did, with fear and hope tangled together. When he asked where she came from, she spoke in broken whispers. Her mother had died in a small apartment 2 nights ago, leaving behind her and the twins. She said she saw the lights from his mansion and came in because it looked warm. Ethan couldn't find words. The little girl was just 6 years old, yet she carried the weight of 3 lives on her small shoulders. As she spoke, Ethan's heart twisted in a way it hadn't in years. He had lost his wife in an accident long ago, and since then he'd drowned himself in work. Success had filled his bank accounts, but not his heart. People called him the coldest millionaire in the city. But as he looked at Lila holding her brothers, something inside him melted. He wanted to call security, to follow protocol, but he couldn't. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, his hands shaking, and made warm milk. When he came back, Lila looked up in surprise. He sat beside her, handed her the milk, and said softly, "They're safe now." Her eyes filled with tears. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He stayed awake beside them, listening to the quiet breathing of the children who had somehow found their way into his life. When morning came, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, and Ethan realized something had changed. His mansion, once cold and lifeless, felt alive. The scent of baby powder and soft coos filled the air. He called his housekeeper, Maria, and told her to prepare breakfast for 4. Maria was shocked when she saw the children, but one look at Ethan's face told her not to ask questions. As Lila ate like she hadn't eaten in days, Ethan sat quietly, lost in thought. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let them go back to the streets. Later that day, he called his lawyer and asked about the procedure for temporary guardianship. The lawyer hesitated. "Sir, are you sure about this? It's complicated." "These children," Ethan interrupted. "They have no one else." "I'll take care of everything." His tone left no room for argument. Over the next few days, Ethan transformed his home. One of the empty guest rooms became a nursery filled with cribs and soft toys. Lila's room was painted yellow because she said it reminded her of sunshine. Ethan found himself doing things he never thought he would. Buying diapers, learning baby formulas, and sitting up all night when one of the twins cried. Every morning, Lila would come running to his office with her messy hair and sleepy eyes, asking if she could help him work. He started teaching her small things, reading invoices, counting numbers, and telling her stories about his travels. Slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to fall. The loneliness he once wore like armor was replaced by laughter and the gentle chaos of family life. His employees noticed the change too. The man who once barked orders now smiled more, spoke softer, and left work early to be home by dinner. One evening, as Ethan read Lila a bedtime story, she looked at him with her big brown eyes and asked, "Mr. Ethan, do you think my mommy is watching us from heaven?" The question caught him off guard. He swallowed hard and replied, "I think she is, Lila, and I think she's proud of you for being so brave." She smiled, then whispered, "I think she's proud of you too." Ethan's chest tightened as he turned off the light. For the first time in years, he prayed silently before sleeping, thanking the universe for sending them to him. But happiness never comes without challenges. A few weeks later, a social worker arrived after receiving a report about abandoned children. She explained that she needed to investigate and possibly relocate them to a foster home. Ethan felt the ground slip beneath his feet. He tried to reason with her, explaining that he was caring for them, that they were safe and loved. But the woman only replied, "You're not their legal guardian. The law requires proper placement." Lila overheard the conversation, her small face pale with fear. That night she hugged Ethan and cried, "Please don't let them take us away." He promised her softly, "I won't. I'll fight for you." And he did. Ethan used every resource he had, not as a millionaire buying his way, but as a man fighting for the people he loved. He gathered proof of the care he provided, got medical reports, and even convinced Maria to testify how deeply he had bonded with the children. The court hearings were long and emotional. At one point, the judge asked Ethan why he cared so much for children who weren't his. Ethan stood up and said, "Because family isn't about blood. It's about love, responsibility, and the moments that change us. They walked into my life by accident, but they became my purpose." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked moved. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, Ethan received the call he had been waiting for. The adoption was approved. He drove straight to the children's shelter where Lila and the twins were temporarily staying. When Lila saw him walk through the door, she ran and jumped into his arms. "You came back!" she cried. Ethan held her close and whispered, "I told you I would. We're going home." The drive back was filled with laughter, little hands reaching for his, and tears he couldn't hold back. The mansion stood waiting, but it wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Life after that became beautifully ordinary. There were mornings filled with spilled cereal, late nights with storybooks, and weekends spent in the garden. Ethan learned how to braid Lila's hair, how to burp the twins, and how to love without fear. His business partners noticed he started bringing the kids to charity events, and instead of talking about profits, he spoke about hope. People who once saw him as distant began to admire him for his heart. The man who had everything but love finally found it in the most unexpected way, in 3 lost souls who gave him back his humanity. Years later, when Lila graduated from high school, Ethan sat in the audience with tears in his eyes. She spoke on stage and said, "When I was little, I thought no one would ever love us again. But then a kind man opened his door and found us sleeping in his room. He didn't just give us a home. He gave us a father." The crowd clapped and Ethan smiled through his tears. He realized that love doesn't ask for permission or reason, it just finds a way. And so, the cold-hearted millionaire who once lived in silence spent the rest of his life surrounded by laughter, love, and the sound of children calling him Dad. It didn't matter how much money he had anymore. What mattered was that one unexpected night had turned his lonely mansion into a warm, beating heart of family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories of kindness and second chances. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a single act of kindness slowly turned into a new beginning for Ethan Cross. The man who once measured life in numbers and business deals now measured it in giggles, tiny footsteps and bedtime stories. Lila, the little girl who had wandered into his mansion lost and afraid, had filled his home with light. Every morning she would run through the halls barefoot, her laughter echoing off the marble floors. Ethan found himself smiling, genuine, unguarded smiles that he hadn't felt in years. The 2 newborns, now healthy and strong, brought warmth into the cold spaces of his heart. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt alive again. Ethan made sure the babies received the best medical care possible. Doctors who once worked for his company's hospital division were now attending to the twins as personal family physicians. They were growing quickly, each day bringing new joy and new chaos into his well-ordered life. He hired a nanny to help, but Lila refused to let anyone else feed or comfort them. "They're my brothers," she would say, proudly standing on her toes, trying to reach the crib. Ethan admired her spirit, so small yet so full of love and courage. He enrolled her in a nearby school, bought her books, and packed her lunch every morning himself. When she came home in the afternoon, she'd run to him and tell him everything that happened, her words tumbling over each other with excitement. The mansion, which had once been silent, was now full of life. Ethan's employees noticed the change in him. The man who had once been distant, strict, and emotionless was now kind, patient, and even playful. He would come to the dining room, with baby formula stains on his shirt, smiling as if it were a badge of honor. He learned to burp the babies, read bedtime stories, and even make pancakes, though most of them ended up burnt. Lila would tease him, giggling, "Mr. Ethan, you're the worst cook ever." He'd laugh back, "That's why you're in charge of breakfast from now on." Life felt perfect. For Ethan, this new routine wasn't an inconvenience. It was healing. Every time he looked at Lila and the twins, he saw the family he'd lost. But this time, he wasn't haunted by grief. He was surrounded by hope. But one ordinary afternoon, that fragile happiness was threatened. A knock echoed through the mansion. When Ethan opened the door, a woman stood there holding a folder, a social worker. Her tone was polite but firm as she introduced herself, and said she had received a report about 3 minors living with a man who wasn't their legal guardian. Ethan's smile faded. She explained that the children had to be placed in official care until further investigation. Ethan's heart sank. He tried to reason with her, explaining that he had taken them in when they had nowhere else to go, that he had provided for them, loved them, and treated them as his own. But the social worker only shook her head. "I understand, Mr. Cross, but laws are laws. The children need legal protection. Until the paperwork is verified, they'll have to come with us." Lila overheard everything. She ran to Ethan, grabbing his arm tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Please don't let them take us," she cried. "We'll be good, we promise." Ethan knelt down, holding her close, trying to reassure her even though his own voice trembled. "It's going to be okay, Lila. I promise you, I'll fix this." But deep down, he was terrified. That night, after the social worker left with the children, the mansion felt unbearably silent again. The nursery was empty, the toys were still scattered on the floor, but the laughter was gone. Ethan walked through the halls in disbelief, his heart heavy. He sat in Lila's room, holding one of her drawings, 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun with the words, "Me, my brothers, and Mr. Ethan," written in uneven letters. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "I won't give up on you." The next morning, Ethan began the fight of his life. He hired lawyers, not to win a case for business this time, but to win back his family. The process was long and painful. The authorities questioned his intentions, his lifestyle, even his ability to be a parent. They said he was too busy, too rich, too unfamiliar with family life. But Ethan didn't back down. He showed them records of the children's medical treatments, receipts for school fees, and testimony from his house staff about how he personally cared for them. "You don't understand," he told the judge. "They saved me as much as I saved them." Weeks turned into months. Lila would send him small letters through the social worker, crayon drawings of the mansion, the garden, and a man with brown hair holding 2 babies. She always ended them with the words, "Please come get us soon." Ethan kept every letter, reading them each night before bed. It gave him strength to keep fighting. During one of the court hearings, the judge asked him directly, "Mr. Cross, these children are not related to you. Why are you fighting so hard to keep them?" Ethan stood up, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Because love doesn't ask for blood. It just happens. I didn't plan for them to come into my life, but they did, and I can't imagine my world without them. Family isn't made by blood, it's made by love." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked moved. After a few more hearings, the final decision was made. Ethan was granted full custody of Lila and the twins. When the papers were signed, he felt a weight lift off his chest. He immediately drove to the children's center where they were staying. When Lila saw him walk through the door, her eyes widened in disbelief before she ran toward him shouting, "You came back!" He scooped her up in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "I told you I would, sweetheart. We're going home." That evening, the mansion once again came alive. Lila ran through the halls, laughing and calling out to the twins. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching them, his heart full. He realized that this time his house wasn't just made of bricks and glass. It was filled with love, with family, with meaning. He spent the next few years giving them everything money couldn't buy: his time, his care, and his heart. As the years passed, Ethan grew older, but the joy in his home never faded. Lila grew into a bright young woman, always reminding him to eat on time and teasing him when he wore his reading glasses. The twins called him Dad before they even knew what it meant. Every evening, the family would sit together for dinner, sharing stories and laughter. On weekends, they'd visit the park, and Ethan would push the twins on the swings while Lila read a book nearby. One night, years later, Lila sat beside him on the porch as the sun set behind the garden. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "I used to think money was everything," he said, "but it couldn't give me this." He gestured to the house glowing with laughter inside. "You, your brothers, you gave me life again." Lila leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "You gave us one too." The man who had once lived in silence now spent his days surrounded by love. The mansion that once felt like a museum had turned into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and memories. And every time Ethan looked at the family he had built, not by blood but by kindness, he was reminded that sometimes the people who enter your life by accident end up becoming your destiny. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories of kindness, love, and second chances.